A 30-year-old train goes to its death in a Newmarket crematorium. The rolling stock's scrapped because there's asbestos under the outer steel skin. It's heated in a furnace which reaches 1100 degrees centigrade. 300 rail units a year come to this fiery end.
There's a question I'm sure you've had for a long time. It's one even a casual fan of Thomas has to come to at some point. They exist in every canon, we've talked about them before. Scrap engines are everywhere in Thomas and Friends stories. It's an easy mirror into a darker tone. Death or loss in a universe where those tones don't fit as well naturally. You're shown these engines, wagons, trucks, even people in a presumably breathing form. Hell, even the locomotives themselves are arguably more alive than the people are, actually being able to move and interact with the environment. It all just poses the question even more though. How do these trains die? It's a silly question, and when you remember we're talking about Thomas the Tank Engine, that tone quickly drops again. That said, it's very much a fair one, and one that again is pretty much unavoidable. Just take a second to think about it. How many times have we seen a number of characters cheat death? Now think about the characters we've seen who have actually met it. Then consider that these are again locomotives. Large metal workhorses that in real life met similar fates. It's only when you put sentience into that engine that the morbidness becomes, well, morbid. I'll say it now, the question itself isn't one I can answer with full commitment to Audrey's vision. Understandably, he focused on other things like character development, world building, satanic standing stones. He didn't really have time to answer that question. Or maybe he didn't have an answer himself. I personally start to lean towards the latter when you think about how convoluted the answer really must be. Or honestly again, maybe just too morbid and unfaithful to what the vision of Thomas and Friends even is. The real kicker, however, comes when you take it past Audrey's vision, as the TV show is where we really take in the scrapped and dead engines and see the interactions other characters have with them. That said though, the Railway series is the only place we see them basically still alive, if not for much longer. The TV series is hunks of locomotives past, only discernible by the engine they were made from. No story, no sign of life. You may have noticed that I've tried to sidestep another inevitable question. If we can question how do these engines die, it always comes right back around to, well, why are these engines alive? And that's something we've never been given a direct answer to from a legitimate source. Just that they are. So it quickly becomes hard to question what would happen or what does happen when an engine loses that sentience. If you're a fan of Victor Tanzig, you may enjoy the idea of first combustion, where engines are brought to life with the first firing in a magical sort of way. Perhaps you're a fan of Shed 17 and believe there's more nefarious reasons to such. That's not why you pressed on this video, however. We're not here to focus on how these engines came to live. Again, we're focusing on how they would pass. And though I don't know what Audrey or Britt was thinking, I do have my own ideas. And for that, let's go back to the Railway series first. It's shown that these are, again, sentient engines that are alive. The cutter is preparing a torch to take either more off an engine, or from the looks of the others, maybe even finish one off. And now the question is raised as to how he would do that. We can infer that the smokebox door, or again face, is intact. Perhaps once that's removed, the engine will lose all sentience. Well, at least to us, any signs of being such. But normal engines do exist in the Railway series. Locomotives without faces, and they are just engines. So does that mean these are more reverted back to a natural state? With the face being removed, they're no longer workhorses but more work tools, with no minds of their own? You could say they're just dirty, but on some of these engines there's not even signs of flesh. Perhaps it is the smoke boxes that give the engines that sentience. This would be an easy way to explain things like Henry's rebuild, with the smokebox door being simply transferred from one engine to another. It also must mean that there's not things like vital organs or functioning organic systems in the engines, at least as opposed to more mechanical ones. No beating heart or blood vessels. At least that's what one would think before you see these engines can blush and even tear up. meaning there has to be some sort of blood system or at least something similar. So what does the scrapping process of a sentient engine really look like? Well, now that we sadly know there's at least a system like blood in these engines, we know that to some degree they should be able to bleed. We've never seen this, of course. Hell, you can't even put horror on YouTube without telling YouTube first. Good luck fitting it into a children's book. Regardless, however, for this we'll have to look at real life, and how the actual dismantling process works on an actual engine. Let's look at something a bit more familiar. In most cases, engines are stored and used for specific parts. This is what we see happen not only to Cadrid, but many other engines in real life today, in railways literally across the world. We don't know exactly where these vital organs would be or what they even are, but we also know these engines at least have feelings or maybe even nerves, in close to every part they're made of. You'll notice engines, coaches, and trucks oof when buffed, they cry out when they crash. They feel these things and are shown to be able to identify certain parts of them that may feel off or wrong. Unless Godred was killed off immediately or without those nerves being somehow removed, presumably it'd be a long and painful process of losing bits and pieces of themselves until nothing was left. Imagine you lose a finger every day, eventually toes, maybe then knees and legs, and progressively you feel less and less of yourself be forcibly removed, unsure as to who it'll go to. They're not people, so instead of bleeding out, they're simply losing more and more of themselves, with no chance of escaping, likely hoping that one day they do hit that vital organ or part, whatever it may be, or finally just put an end to whatever it is they must feel. That's only one case, however. What about engines left to rot? We see these pretty commonly in every part of the world, and of course in Thomas, but we're often shown this isn't something that necessarily leads to death. Almost always it's rediscovery, reuse, new character, and new merch. What about in the real world though? And truth be told, in all actuality, there's probably much more than 2 or so engines that were luckily found by Thomas just lost on Sodor. So what happens to these engines in real life? Well, they're left. They aren't cared for anymore, the metal is no longer kept. Their firebox is no longer sparked or cleansed, and their boiler tubes never unclogged. Quickly these engines become relics, simply shadows of their former selves. Metal weakens and certain parts start to decay. Maybe kids find it and graffiti it, jump on and hurry up that aging process. Plants find their ways into crevices unthought of by people. And beautiful machines quickly turn into nightmare fuel or bug safe havens. Now imagine that engine is alive. We've established engines have some sort of functioning system in them that allows them to blush and feel, but let's remember they aren't people. They don't eat and they don't drink, at least because they have to. They do it for movement, and when you lose that movement, what do you get? Well, like I said, forgotten. Rust starts to build, and parts start to decay. Eventually, they lose a buffer. Time goes on, and you feel your side rods give way. The frame that holds your boiler above your wheels only cracks with every passing day, and plants find their ways into every crevice. Bugs quickly overtake any area they find suitable. More parts start to decay. The grass around you grows higher and higher. The air becomes heavier, the mind becomes numb. The thoughts become louder, the brain starts to fade. And maybe then, these engines can have peace. A long-awaited and painful peace, but peace. This isn't the only kind of scrap engine that exists though. If we truthfully went through them all, this would be a very long video, and I don't think you care to watch all of that. There's engines who have fallen into the sea, been buried under rubble or in mines. But that's never the thing that scares the engines, or that really does them that final act in the show. The only place an engine can truly be, well, killed, at least in the TV series, seemingly is the scrapyards. The scrapyards is, for the engines, a museum of death. Imagine a cemetery where the bodies aren't buried and you get to watch the bodies in their states of decay. That's pretty much what it is for the engines. I hate to sound like a stupid BuzzFeed article who's looking to have a problem with the show, and don't think that's what I'm trying to do. I don't take this as a necessarily bad thing, but as an idea that is pretty much what you're looking at. It's understandable the engines are uncomfortable and scared here, as everywhere around them they're reminded of their mortality. How do these engines get scrapped though? Well, again, in the Railway series, we see how real life pretty much goes every time. A man with a cutter's torch ready for whatever part he needs. I'd like to turn to Stepney Gets Lost, however, as in this we see a large grabber attempt to grab Stepney. Now, this could be to just derail him, or maybe move him, sure. But why this crane? This isn't a simple movement crane, not one you would use to just move a train to another track. This is a scrap crane. And what do scrap cranes do? Well, to be fair, they do move things, but they also further add to the destruction of whatever they're picking up. The grabbers would have been acting as actual grabbers, piercing through the metal as they crush it to a solid fit. Take another look at this crane. This is what was about to pick up Stepney. And imagine a sentient engine in this same position. If Ari and Bert are to be believed, many have been before, but Stepney would have been crushed to death in an instant by a machine made of the same thing he is. Cold metal piercing through his tanks and boiler quickly. Any tube in that boiler quickly turned to silly string. Hard metal reduced to tinfoil. And honestly, I'd rather not imagine what comes out of the face. But it's hard to imagine any sign of life would be there. You know, this video was kinda just me rambling about spooky things on Halloween, but if anything, I hope the video answers the question as to why there maybe isn't an answer in any form of canon to this question. Death is something we all have to learn about, cope with, and deal with in life. Maybe we aren't meant to overthink it, and just know that these engines are alive, like us, and have to be careful should they ever find themselves in a perilous situation like us. Maybe it was just to bring in that extra bit of realism, since there's no shortage of scrapped locomotives in our world. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a little something more to this all. But like I said, we'll probably never know.
Either subscribe, donate, or get the fuck out.